Hydrogen is what powers this lovely Toyota Mirai. By the way, Mirai, Japanese for future. Mirai. But rather than the motor being powered by a battery, it's powered by a battery and a hydrogen fuel cell. While I'm in California, the only state in the US to have hydrogen filling stations at all. Correction, I just found out there's one fueling station in Hawaii. I want to answer a couple questions about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. What is a hydrogen fuel cell? How does this package work? What are the pros? What are the cons? Do they make sense for you? And do they make sense for mass scale adoption? The answer to that last one is no, but there's more to it. This is a second generation Toyota Mirai. The difference between the first and second gen is subtle, but the way you can tell the difference is the second gen is a sleek, curvy, rear-wheel drive based sedan, and the first gen is a Prius mixed with a catfish. This is one of only two hydrogen fuel cell vehicles currently in production in the world. The other one is the Hyundai Nexo. So if you're in the market for a new hydrogen fuel cell car, your decision can be made by one simple question. Do you need a hatchback? This Mirai is built on the same platform as the Lexus LS, albeit with a shorter wheelbase. It is rear-motored, rear-wheel drive, and that rear motor is 182 horsepower, 220 pound-feet of torque. It's 136 kilowatts. Yeah, it's not that quick. It has 180-something horsepower, but it weighs over 4,000 pounds. Two cars that are quicker than this. Toyota's own BZ4X, which is already sad, but also the Prius. Right around here-ish is the battery pack. Small capacity, 1.2 kilowatt hour battery pack like you'd find in a hybrid. It may even be from a Toyota hybrid, I'm not sure. This battery acts as a buffer, but more on that later. Behind the rear axle, in front of the rear axle, and down the middle in the transmission tunnel are the three hydrogen tanks. Together they store 5.6 kilograms or just 12 pounds of hydrogen. In terms of gallon capacity, I couldn't find the exact number. I think it's somewhere around 35-40 gallons. Quite a lot of volume. Underneath this exceedingly long hood is the magic sauce, the fuel cell stack. In here, hydrogen from the onboard tanks reacts with oxygen from the outside air in an oxidation reaction to generate heat and electricity, and the byproduct is water. Look, I don't fully understand how the fuel cell stack works. I know there's some membranes in there, a stack of them, air mixes, magic happens, and electricity and heat are produced, but I don't have a deep understanding of it. One thing I don't hear people talking about is the heat that's generated in the fuel cell stack. The operating temperature is around the boiling point of water, so it's not liquid water that's coming out. It's water vapor. It's a steam generator. And you can't forget everyone's favorite gimmick to show on the Mirai, the button labeled H2O. Hit that, your fuel cell purges itself of all of its water, in case you don't want water being dumped out in your garage. Or you could drive over your garden and water your plants with your hydrogen fuel cell emissions. You'll be crushing them, but they'll be watered. Because the fuel cell stack draws in outside air through a filter, Toyota's marketing department got a little creative. In their press release, they proudly proclaimed that this car cleans the air as you drive. I mean, yeah, technically that's correct, but I could also duct tape a Dyson to the hood of a Tesla and claim the same thing. I'm disappointed to report the fuel cell is pretty dang quiet. I was hoping it would make a bunch of fun air whooshing sounds, but it kind of doesn't. You can very faintly hear the hydrogen rushing out of the pipes. If you listen very carefully and under heavy acceleration, you can barely hear, it sounds like a blower on the air intake. There's some sort of vacuum cleanery noise. Here, I'll demonstrate. This video is sponsored by Factor. Ready-to-heat meals so easy, I had to figure out a way to make them more complicated. Factor meals are delivered in a refrigerated box straight to your door. Your food comes to you. It's like fishing, but completely different. Preparing a Factor meal is as easy as stabbing it to vent it, putting it in the microwave for 2 minutes, powered by a battery box in the back of your Reliant Robin. Some of that is optional, and you're ready to go. I love Factor meals, and I recommend them to all of my friends. That's at least one person. And I also love their smoothies. This is strawberry banana. It's definitely my favorite. I usually opt for the Chef Choice meals, but you also have Calorie Smart, vegan, and there's another thing that I can't remember to choose from. It's your choice. This one I'm eating right now is jalapeno lime cheddar chicken. If you want to try Factor for yourself and enjoy delicious, very easy meals, go to factor75.com and use code AGINGWHEELS50 at checkout to get 50% off your first box. I'm gonna eat it like this. I know this is a parking lot and I'm filming an ad, but this feels like a nice little picnic. Except I'm in a Robin and everyone that drives by is staring at me. Aside from that, it's fine. Back to the battery pack. The fuel cell generates electricity, so why does it need a battery? Several reasons. For one, the fuel cell is capable of 128 kilowatts of output peak, but the motor is capable of 135. So to fill in some extra power, the battery pack is capable of delivering up to 35 kilowatts for peak performance situations. For instance, you've stolen Toyota Mirai and you're trying to outrun the police. Just as an example, a fuel cell stack needs ramp up and ramp down time, while a battery can deliver its power instantly. Having a battery means you get regen braking. To use the motor as a generator to slow the car down, you have to have somewhere to put that energy. You can't re-electrolyze the water, but you can charge a battery. Basically, the battery's a buffer. The main source of power is the hydrogen fuel cell. The Hyundai Nexo is also set up like this, but it doesn't have to be this way. GM's prototype hydrogen fuel cell Semi has a 200 kilowatt-hour battery. The battery is the main source of power in that truck, and the fuel cells exist just to keep that battery charged. It's the same thing as this Mirai, just a different balance of power. There's no reason Toyota couldn't also shift the balance with this Mirai. Shrink the fuel cell, increase the size of the battery pack, heck, even add a charger and a plug so you can plug it in overnight and have 40 or so miles of battery-only range before the fuel cell kicks on. It'd be like a Volt, but a fuel cell stack instead of an engine. Although I suspect the reason Toyota doesn't do this is because despite this being a car that any member of the public can go in and buy or lease and drive out in the real world, it's still fairly experimental, and if your goal is to test out the fuel cell stack and the hydrogen fueling station network and all of those hydrogen components, probably not the best idea to engineer a car that uses hydrogen less often, but I'm just guessing. This doesn't drive like you would expect from a modern EV. Most of the regen is handled through the blended braking. The liftoff regen is basically nothing, although you can increase the liftoff regen by hitting BR on the shifter like you can with the Prius, but that increases in an indiscernible amount. Then once your battery is fully charged, which doesn't take long, you lose all regen entirely. There's a creep mode that you cannot turn off, and the torque is not instant. It sort of ramps up gradually. They could have made this drive like a modern EV, but instead it drives like a big quiet Prius. Anyway, that's what's going on in here, but why? Why hydrogen fuel cell? What are the benefits of hydrogen fuel cell over pure battery electric power? Well, to the end user, i.e. the idiot behind the wheel, there's a few benefits. Range. Hydrogen is incredibly energy dense. From the just 12 pounds of hydrogen on board this Mirai, it has an EPA estimated range of 353 miles. Although the owner tells me real world's more like 250 to 300 miles, that's still incredibly impressive from 12 pounds of hydrogen. Weight? Hydrogen tanks weigh less than a full battery pack. They take up quite a bit of space, but they're made of carbon fiber and full of air. Fill-up times. This is one I'm sure you already know about. Rather than charging overnight or charging up in 10 minutes to an hour at a rapid charger, this thing can be filled up at a hydrogen fueling station in about 5 minutes. The experience is very similar to a gas pump, if gas was stored at 10,000 psi and chilled to negative 40 degrees Celsius. Cost. Hydrogen isn't free, but if you buy a Mirai or a Nexo, you get 3 years of hydrogen for free. Even if you buy a used Mirai, hydrogen costs something, but almost no one is paying for it. But there are downsides too. While it's totally possible, currently there are no hydrogen fuel cell cars available with the plug that you can charge at home overnight, so you're 100% reliant on the infrastructure. Related to that point, currently in the US, there are only about 60 hydrogen fueling stations total. And not only are all of them in California, all of them are in 3 distinct areas with a few connector stations in between. So if you don't live in these areas, you can't have a hydrogen fuel cell car. And on top of that, hydrogen fueling stations are incredibly unreliable. Just a quick browse of hydrogen fueling station maps shows how many are out of hydrogen, offline, or otherwise down. The owner of this car tells me that it is a problem. Now I said these come with free hydrogen. Good thing, because currently hydrogen is $30 a kilogram, meaning a full tank in this would cost $170, and the operating cost would be 56 cents per mile, assuming a range of 300 miles. To put that into perspective, diesel right now is $5.60 a gallon, so if you had to pay for the hydrogen in this Mirai, the fuel cost would be the same as operating a 10 mile per gallon diesel truck. Hydrogen is not very energy dense. Now, I know I just said it was incredibly energy dense, but that's by weight. You may know this about air. It's not very heavy. So to get a useful amount of hydrogen on board this Mirai for a usable amount of range, it has to be stored at 10,000 psi. That's 700 bar. To cope with those incredible pressures, the tanks are cylindrical and made of carbon fiber. It'd be more space efficient if they're rectangular, but then they'd explode, and that's not ideal. They could fit a lot more hydrogen on board if it was stored in liquid form, but to explain why they don't do that, here's a video from Engineering Explained. This is an oversimplification, obviously, and there's lots of things about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles I just don't understand. I have a pretty deep knowledge about electric vehicles and combustion vehicles, but fuel cells, there's not that many out there. I don't know all that much about them, and I have a lot of questions. For instance, How long does the fuel cell last? Does it last forever? Does it degrade? How do these do in the winter? Do things affect it that I don't even know yet, like maybe high altitudes, for example? I don't know the in-depth pros and cons of this thing. But anyway, to the owners of these things, the downsides are almost entirely centered around getting the hydrogen. As of right now, it's kind of a pain. But, and you probably knew this was coming, there are problems associated with hydrogen that don't affect the end user at all. The most commonly cited of which is, where does that hydrogen come from, There's two main ways to produce hydrogen. There's electrolysis and there's methane steam reformation. There's three kinds of electrolysis, but the most common one by far is alkaline electrolysis. Put incredibly simply, if I try to explain it more in depth, I'll get many things wrong. They zap water with electricity and it splits it into hydrogen and oxygen. Assuming clean electricity was used for the zappy zap, this process is emissions free and referred to as green hydrogen. Because colors. Methane steam reformation is a process I understand even less. It's a process where methane, i.e. natural gas, is injected with high temperature, 700 degrees Celsius steam, and I don't know, out pops hydrogen? I don't understand how this works. This process does produce emissions and is referred to as gray hydrogen. Unless those emissions are captured, then it's called blue hydrogen. That should be the name of this color. As much as I dislike boiling down a series of complex processes down into a few color names, I do have to admit that saying blue hydrogen is a lot easier than saying carbon capture, methane steam reformation produced hydrogen. The fact about hydrogen production that a lot of people like to quote is that some ridiculous number, like 97% of the world's hydrogen production, is gray hydrogen, the kind that causes emissions. But there's a couple things you should know about that. First, while the production of gray hydrogen does produce emissions, running a hydrogen fuel cell car like this on entirely gray hydrogen only causes about half as many emissions as an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. Now take that with a grain of salt. I found that as a statement in an energy.gov document with no information attached to it. For all I know, the equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle could be a semi-truck. Second, while the world's hydrogen may be 97% gray, that is not the case here in California. Here in California, the stations are mandated to have at least 33% renewably sourced hydrogen, and a lot of them are 100% renewably sourced. On many hydrogen fueling station maps, you can see a graph of what percentage of the hydrogen was sourced from where. But the big problem with hydrogen is inefficiency and complexity, not just of the car, but of the whole hydrogen system. Alkaline electrolysis that I mentioned earlier is only 53 to 62% efficient. That means if you produce 100 kilowatt hours worth of wind energy and put that into electrolysis, you're only getting out a maximum of 62 kilowatt hours worth of hydrogen. Once the hydrogen is produced, it then has to be compressed to 700 bar or liquefied for transport. When hydrogen expands, it heats up, so anytime it's transferred between tanks, it has to be super chilled to negative 40 degrees Celsius, which takes away even more energy. Then once that hydrogen finally makes its way into the car, this fuel cell is only about 65% efficient. How does the Mirai display efficiency? Before I got in this car, I was expecting maybe miles per kilogram or miles per liter. Nope, miles per gallon equivalent. Toyota decided to show the efficiency of this car based in terms of gasoline. Right now I'm averaging 58 miles per gallon equivalent, which compared to EVs is terrible. So of the initial energy produced, only about 30% of that makes its way into driving the car forward. Compare that to a battery electric vehicle, which doesn't have fuel that needs to be transported. Its electricity is transported instantaneously over the grid, and the efficiency of the whole system is about 80%. Hydrogen starts to look a little complex and silly. All this complexity and inefficiency is why most companies have gone all in on battery electric vehicles and not hydrogen fuel cells. This graph I found, which very clearly illustrates the complexity of the whole hydrogen system, was made by Volkswagen. As Technology Connections puts it, it's an electric car, but with more steps. And for what? Short fill-up times? The main benefit of hydrogen is quickly becoming irrelevant. For this trip out to California, I rented a standard range Model 3, the cheapest Tesla you can buy, and even it can drive well over 100 miles from just 15 minutes of charging, and you can charge it at home, which you can't do with this. So does that mean hydrogen is stupid and we should stop? No, of course not. Just because it doesn't make sense for everybody doesn't mean it makes sense for nobody. EVs make more sense for more people, but for some people, a hydrogen fuel cell car might make more sense. For instance, someone that wants an EV but can't charge at home. Although the cases where a hydrogen fuel cell makes more sense in a passenger car is pretty limited. Where fuel cells make a lot more sense, and you probably already know this, is in big things. Trucks, buses, semis, planes, trains, applications where the size and weight of the battery is a much bigger problem. Battery technology is continually improving and making this less and less of an issue all the time, but one thing that won't change is charging enormous batteries in short periods of time requires incredible amounts of power. For some applications, for instance long-haul trucking, it might make more sense to go with a network of hydrogen fueling stations rather than a network of multi-megawatt charging stations or battery swap stations. For smaller vehicles, a fuel cell could be a great option, not as the main power source, but as a range extender. Imagine, for instance, an F-150 Lightning with a fuel cell range extender. You'd have a relatively large battery that would be great for almost all of your needs, but if you want to go on long trips or tow something, fuel cell range extender. But I'm getting lost in future possibilities. As of right now, the Mirai is not a terribly enticing proposition. What Tesla got right is that you have to make the cars desirable and you have to make the fueling network yourself. Tesla didn't just make a car that's better for the environment, they made it fast, fun, great software, cheap to operate. It has a network of fueling stations that allow you to traverse the country easily. This has none of that. To get people to buy these, they have to give away the fuel, and to own one, you have to live in San Francisco, Sacramento, LA, Honolulu, or maybe San Diego if you're really determined. And realistically, no one's buying these, they're leasing them. I definitely think hydrogen has a future. I don't think it's the future, but it's definitely a part of it. Regardless what happens, it'll be interesting to see how the future unfolds for hydrogen and all other fuels. Anyway, thanks to the owner of this Mirai for loaning it to me for this video, and thank you for watching. Technology's fun, isn't it?